Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody. Hello. Yes, you have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo, and I'm Gary Michuta, your host and sensei for this hour in which we learn how to explain, defend the faith with clarity, charity, and confidence. Like I like to say, this is where the rubber of catechesis meets the road of everyday life, and got a great show in store for you today. Actually, yesterday's show was fantastic with Pat Flynn coming on, and he gave us, I think, one of the best arguments from morality for the existence of God that I've heard. I've read on it. It wasn't really one of my go-to arguments, if you will, because I always felt like it was a bit loose. People could wiggle out of it, so I prefer other arguments that Thomas Aquinas and others give. But nevertheless, he did a great job giving an analytical view of basically, if you believe that morality is a feature in reality, in real life, then God naturally follows. And basically, if you don't have God, then you can't really hold to that original position. And so he was doing something that actually we've been doing over a number of programs with our guest for today, Ken Hensley, on the flip side of belief. Ken and I, we've been doing a number of programs where we basically, a lot of criticism is launched against the belief in God, and atheism kind of escapes criticism. So we figured, well, how about if you flip it around and start looking critically? If you deny the existence of God, what are the consequences? What are the ramifications of that denial? People think, well, I could just deny God exists and nothing changes in my world. Well, really, you kind of knocked out the foundations for some very basic beliefs. So Ken's going to be coming on the other side of the break. We're going to talk about, this program is called The Iron Bed of Naturalism. That's going to be a lot of fun. And without further ado, since at the corner of my eye, I spotted the emoji explosion on the chat room, I want to welcome all of you watching social media, live stream, Facebook, YouTube. Hello, everybody. I also want to welcome all of you listening on radio and via podcast as well. Welcome aboard, everybody. Also, finding the fallacy for today, we're going to do the et tu quoque fallacy. And that's basically, what about you? I mean, that would be a popular translation of the Latin. And also we're going to meet an early church father, actually a kind of important church father, although not very well known in popular circles. His name is Socrates Scholasticus. Socrates Scholasticus. So lots of great stuff in store for us today. In fact, when Ken comes on the other side of the break, if you have any questions for him, give us a call at 888-526-2151. That's 888-526-2151. Love to hear from you. And, as always, you can send us your emails. Love to hear from you. I got some great emails from people sharing their experience, trying to evangelize. Maybe some people were trying to evangelize them. Some great questions, too, by the way, in the Dojo mailbox. And you can be part of that. Just send us your email to questions@handsonapologetics.com, and that goes straight to my email. I do respond, and occasionally, I'll have a mailbox show, and we'll go through it on the air, because lots of great stuff. But we need a few more before we do that, so keep them coming, folks. Also, I just want to point out that handsonapologetics.com is one of my two websites. That's kind of like the general info about what I'm up to. And the other website is GaryMichuta.com. So if you ever want to get the audio courses on apologetics that I gave, seminars on apologetics, you can access my books. all sorts of great stuff. That's on GaryMachuda.com. So those are my two websites, just FYI, just in case you need them. And let's see, I think I covered everything. Why don't we jump to our Finding the Fallacy for today? Like I said, the name is Et tu quoque. So for those Latinists out there, you know exactly what this fallacy is about. And basically it means, and you also. So it is an appeal to hypocrisy. It's a fallacy that intends to discredit the opponent's argument by asserting that the opponent failed to act consistently in accord with its conclusions. So, so if you are talking to someone about that we need to lead moral lives, and they pull out the et tu quoque, namely, oh yeah, well look at you and all these others that don't live up to it, that is the et tu quoque. It tries to basically label a charge of hypocrisy on you. And as you can tell, it's a subset of the ad hominem. It's a personal attack. And, the funny thing is, if you think about it, right doing is good. You ought to do it. But it doesn't negate right teaching, right? You can teach something right, and it is right, although you might not live up to that teaching. So hypocrisy doesn't undermine the truth of what's being taught, although it does kind of show it might be embarrassing or a personal fault. But that's beside the point. Right teaching, right acting are really two distinct things. And in fact, if you want a biblical verse for that, one of my favorites is Matthew 23, I think it's 1 and 2, where Jesus says that the scribes and Pharisees sit on the seat of Moses, therefore do and observe whatever they tell you, but do not practice, because they preach but they don't practice. In other words, they're hypocrites. So right teaching, right doing, two separate things. And again, since it's an ad hominem fallacy, you could always use that one tactic that we say on the show. Accept it, say, fine, let's say, even hypothetically, I am a hypocrite. Let's say I don't live up to the church's teaching. Nevertheless, is this particular teaching true? You got to refocus the argument. So you absorb the argument, you say, fine, okay, I'm a hypocrite, but nevertheless, why is this not true? And that is our Finding the Fallacy for today, the et tu quoque fallacy. All right, let's jump to the Meet the Early Church Father for today, Socrates Scholasticus. This is not Socrates the philosopher, but actually it's an early church father who was born around 380 A.D. and died somewhere around 439. He's important. First off, he has the surname Scholasticus. That's not his last name. But basically, it means that he's a lawyer. So we won't hold that against him. But nevertheless, he has a background in law. And Jurgen says about him that there is nothing much of value that we know about Socrates' life. He was born, like I said, around 380 at Constantinople, where he was educated by pagan grammarians. He later fled to Egypt in consequence of disturbances that followed upon the cleansing of the Mithraism and the destruction of the Serapeum by Theophilus, Bishop of Alexandria. And his uncle Cyril succeeded him. Socrates' History of the Church is his solitary claim to fame, and it is a solid one. And we know him through his History of the Church, and he's probably one of the best equipped persons to continue the work of another church father we talk about a lot in terms of church history, Eusebius of Caesarea, his History of the Church. It's interesting to observe that we derive just a few of the early church historians, like our whole knowledge of the first 4 centuries of the church, really come from these people. It comes from Eusebius, Philostorgius, Socrates, Zosimon, and Theodoret. And they provide a continuous and solid history of the church for the first 400 years. Now, someone could say, well, that's not really important because we have the writings of the early church fathers. We can kind of reconstruct things from these sources. But though that's true, Jurgens points out at the same time, some of it would be entirely lost, and much of it would be subject to a certain conjecture. An enormous amount of what we take for a fact would remain somewhat cloudy and uncertain. So thanks to these historians, we're able to get a much clearer understanding of the history of the first 4 centuries of the church. Now, Socrates' history is available to us in 7 books that was written at the request of a certain Theodore, who was probably a monk or a cleric, whereas Socrates himself was a layman. The history is professedly a continuation of Eusebius's church history. Eusebius's church history concluded in 323 AD, just prior to the Council of Nicaea in 325. So Socrates traces a few years back earlier to 305 with the abdication of the Emperor Diocletian, and he kind of takes things up there and fills in things that Eusebius kind of omitted during this era. So Socrates' history covers from the year 305 all the way to the year 439 AD. And let's see, some of his books he revised. For example, we have 2 revisions of his first 2 books. Apparently, he felt that he relied too heavily on Rufinus as a source, and it turns out that he found out Rufinus egregiously was led astray in certain respects to chronology. So basically, he does this huge revision of the first 2 books, and also he does a similar thing in book 6 of his church history, where he does lighter revisions. So it's interesting that book 6, we actually have 2 editions of it, the first edition and then his revised edition. So, he's a very careful historian indeed. His history of the church shows that he's a competent historian. He's genuinely objective. And probably if there's any fault, and this is according to Jurgens, it's because he's a layman. He doesn't really discern the importance of theological debates. So that kind of is a detriment to his church history. However, outside of that, he does a very good job with secular sources and also with sacred sources. And coming up on the other side of the break, we're going to talk to master apologist Ken Hensley about the ironbird bed of naturalism. Stay tuned, folks.
Welcome to our January 11th, 2020 Spiritual Warfare Conference. Every year without fail, this is our most popular, well-attended event. This year's Spiritual Warfare Conference will host Adam Bly, a Catholic demonologist, and an auxiliary member of the International Association of Exorcists, along with Dr. Luis Sandoval, a psychiatrist who's part of the Healing, Deliverance, and Exorcism team for the Diocese of Orange. These 2 gentlemen bring tons of experience and expertise in the area of spiritual warfare. This is going to be a high-information Catholic seminar. I'll be there as well, sharing some riveting stories on the diabolical and liberation found through Jesus Christ from my best-selling book, The Devil in the City of Angels. Mark your calendars, come and join us, and meet other radio hosts from Jesus 911. Contrary to popular belief, spiritual warfare is not demon-centered, it's Christ-centered. Come join us and learn how to armor up and fight the good fight of faith. Catholics, wake up. Don't hit the snooze button. Join us at St. Christopher Catholic Church, 629 South Glendora Avenue, West Covina, California, on January 11, 2020. See you then. Strength and honor in Jesus' name.
Leviticus 11:44 says, "Consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am holy." St. Vincent Pallotti said, "You must be holy in the way God asks you to be holy." God does not ask you to be a Trappist monk or a hermit. He wants you to sanctify the world and your everyday life. May God show us the path to holiness and help us to follow it all the days of our life.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-on Apologetics. Well, belief in God has undergone a lot of objections, a lot of criticism by unbelievers. But how about turning the table and looking critically at what exactly are the ramifications if you deny God's existence? Well, if you are a fan of the program, you know that we've been having a series on that very topic with our good friend Ken Hensley. Ken Hensley is a nationally known Catholic teacher and author who, since converting to the Catholic Church in 1997, has worked extensively in the field of apologetics. He's been interviewed on numerous Catholic radio and television programs, and also is a frequent speaker at Catholic conferences around the country. He is the online resource and pastoral care coordinator for the Coming Home Network, and you can get a lot of his great stuff at the Coming Home Network, ch.org. I think it's chnetwork.org, and also his own website, kennethhensley.com. And Ken Hensley, welcome to Hands-On Apologetics.
Hello there. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can hear you fine.
Yeah. Well, this was funny. I got the call rather late today. When the call came in, I answered, and you were already talking. So anyway,
no problem.
I guess we're getting so used to it that I don't need any lag time. I mean, any lead time. Anyway, That's good to be here with you, Gary. Good to be with you.
Hey, well, it's all good. So how was your Thanksgiving? You have a good Thanksgiving?
It was a little different than usual because my family on both sides were gone. My daughter and her husband and the 8 grandchildren had gone to Utah to meet with my son-in-law's mother. Their side of the family was having Thanksgiving. And then my son was in Houston, Texas. So Tina and I were here by ourselves, and we decided, the grandkids asked us, Grandpa, Grandma, but who are you having Thanksgiving with? And I said, well, at minimum, it'll be the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, so don't worry about us.
Wow, so it was a quiet Thanksgiving at the Hensley household then.
Yeah, it was very nice, though.
Yeah,
it was very nice.
Good.
How about you?
Yeah. It was great. Just thankful for so much, and just hanging out with family, and all was good. So so let's turn to our subject for today. And actually, the title for the program is pretty obscure: "The Iron Bed of Naturalism."
I think it's a good title. I like it a lot. The Iron Bed of Naturalism. Well, throughout our series, we've been talking about the implications of a naturalist worldview. Becoming more and more popular these days with young people. Christianity is old, it's boring, it's not to be considered. Anything from the Western world, in a sense, is old and boring and not to be considered. Things from the Eastern world, they're pretty cool still. They can be considered. But more and more people are, finding themselves attracted to what the new atheists are writing and saying. A lot of young people are becoming atheists and are coming to hold a view of the universe that we could call materialism, if you like. And I don't mean like we don't mean the Madonna sort of materialism, material girl. We mean the belief that nothing exists in our universe but material substances, particles, whatnot. Or you can refer to it as naturalism. Nothing exists but the natural world, the natural universe, which is sort of another way of saying the same thing. Anyway, we've been critiquing the naturalist worldview in the sense of saying, okay, if you assume that naturalism is true, what follows from that? Because a lot of people want to be atheists, and they kind of assume that they have nothing to defend or even nothing to worry about. They think they're taking the scientific position to say materialism is true without ever stopping to even think of what the ramifications are for their view of themselves, their view of the universe, their view of morality, of value. And so we've been taking these subjects one each month. And anyway, we're continuing on today. The lesson today actually is going to touch quite a bit on human consciousness again, a subject we've already talked about, but that's not where we start. So you tell me, you want me to go ahead and launch out with something?
No, actually, I think this is such a valuable series because, like I mentioned earlier in my introduction, that a lot of people think that, well, I could just cross God off and pretend there is no God, and nothing changes. I'm still here. I'm still doing the same stuff. But what they don't realize is they really kicked the chair out from underneath them on giving explanations for some of the most basic things that we take for granted.
Yeah, that's a beautiful illustration. In fact, on the cover of the book that Patrick Madrid and I wrote on this subject some time back, we have a picture of a guy sitting on a tree limb and sawing off the limb that he's sitting on. And so, as you said, what was the illustration you just used?
Kicking the chair out of...
kicking the chair out from under yourself or sawing off the limb on which you're sitting. But you said it very well. I think that many, many just think I can just X God out, and I still have everything else. I still have a sense of meaning and purpose in life. I still have morality. I still have all these things. And they haven't stopped to think about what the implications are. So anyway, the reason I titled this The Iron Bed of Naturalism is because I'm bouncing off a figure from Greek mythology. His name was Procrustes, and he's kind of a famous character. Most people know the phrase Procrustean bed. Mm-hmm. They've heard that phrase, but they don't really know where it comes from. Procrustes was a fellow, again, from Greek mythology who ran a little bed and breakfast on the road. And when travelers came by, he would step out and he would stand out front and invite them in for a meal and for a night. His specialization was that he had a particular bed. He had a special bed that would fit everyone who lay on it. It didn't matter what size you were, everyone fit the bed of Procrustes. And the thing that he didn't mention, though, was the method by which he made sure that everyone fit the bed. Basically, they would have a meal, and then he'd go in and show them the bed. When they were in the room, he would strap them to the bed. And once he had them where he wanted, he would pull out his tools. And if someone was too short for the bed, he would put them on a rack. And, the bed was a rack, and he would stretch them until they fit the bed. If someone was too tall, then he would begin to amputate their feet, their ankles, their lower part of their legs, whatever needed to be amputated to get them to fit the bed. And so miraculously, everyone fit the bed of Procrustes. He made sure of it, one way or another. Okay,
you got to love the ancient Greeks for their bedtime tales, huh?
Yeah, that's one you probably want to tell your children, right? Little bedtime. But
category.
Yeah. The reason I bring it up, though, is that I think of Procrustes as the ultimate reductionist, and that what he did to his travelers and his visitors is what all reductionist worldviews do to human experience. And a reductionist worldview is just a fancy way of saying those who have a worldview where they insist upon reducing all of reality to one essential thing of one sort or another. People who want to reduce all of reality down to one thing, and they see this as being elegant and beautiful because it's simple. Everything reduces to one thing. They hold to what we would call reductionist worldviews. And yet the point that I want to make here and expand on is that what they end up doing to human experience is similar to what Procrustes ended up doing to his visitors. That basically, in order to make you and I, human experience, fit their worldview, they have to chop and whittle and cut and scrape, and they have to, or stretch. They have to torture reality, in other words, to make it fit the iron bed of naturalism, the iron bed of their worldview. And I begin in this lesson by giving two examples from opposite extremes. If you think about the Eastern pantheist, which this applies to several different religions, but philosophically, the Eastern pantheist is a reductionist worldview. The Eastern pantheist says, Gary, nothing exists but spirit. Nothing exists but God, little g. Everything is God. Okay? And if you say to the Eastern pantheist, well, I'm just not sure about that. I mean, I'm sitting here in this office and I'm looking, I have a desk in front of me. That sure doesn't seem like spirit. I'm wearing these headphones now and, I'm talking over the internet. My computer doesn't look like spirit. All these books behind me don't look like spirit. The Eastern pantheist will look at you as though you're a simpleton and will say, Gary, but this is all illusion. Don't you know? What you conceive of as the material world, it's an illusion. The truth is nothing exists but spirit. Now, the opposite extreme of that is what is the materialism that we deal with so much in the Western world now with atheism and whatnot. The materialist says nothing exists but matter. Everything is matter. Nothing exists but particles jostling with one another, interacting with one another according to the strict laws of physics and chemistry. And again, if you or I, unenlightened, obviously, if we say to the atheist, it sure doesn't seem like everything is matter. It just doesn't seem like it. What about the ideas that I have in my head? Are those material? What about memory? What about the consciousness I have of myself as existing as a person? That there's an I, there's a Ken Hensley. Is that a material thing? Is that really true? What about love? What about the process of reasoning? When Einstein stands up at his chalkboard and elaborates on some unbelievably complex mathematical formula, is that mathematical formula a material reality? I mean, are the mathematics behind it material? Right. And is the process by which he's reasoning material? Again, the materialist, and this really applies to us much more than the Eastern pantheist thing, but the materialist literally looks at you and I as though we are simple-minded, that we haven't understood what science has proven, and they say, well, you need to understand that's illusion. All of these things you're talking about, they're an illusion. The reality is that nothing exists but material. Okay? So This is what I mean by a reductionist worldview. Any questions, dear sir? No, I'm just playing with you, Gary.
No, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, it's kind of like the whole realm of evidence kind of is shrunken or expanded in order to kind of fit your predetermined worldview. It's
it has
like
to
that
be
percussion bread. Yeah.
And by the way, I don't go into this in this lesson, but if you think about Christianity, if you think about the worldview that we hold, it's a complex worldview. It's not a simple worldview. And I was reading a book by C.S. Lewis the other day, rereading his book, Mere Christianity, and he mentions that in there. He mentions how that in the real world, the truth is more complicated. Things don't all boil down to one essential thing. And I think that that's what we find in the real world. And so, Christianity is not reductionistic. We don't reduce everything down to material. We don't reduce everything down to, a force, a spirit force or whatever. But materialism is reductionist. And so I have my wonderful little quotation here from Francis Crick, who's an atheist, where he says, your joys and your sorrows, your memories, your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. So, as I've said many times, I'm not making this stuff up. I'm quoting directly from atheist sources. I think I hear the music going.
Yeah, very good. Yes, we're chatting with Ken Hensley about the iron bed of naturalism. Stay tuned, folks.
We have an exciting story for you to listen to. The story of John Pridmore. John Pridmore was a hitman for the gangs in East London.
I met some guys who seemed to have everything that I thought would make you happy. So I started working for these people. So to my shame, I was involved in vicious crime of all sorts.
He collected debts for the gangs, and if people didn't pay their debts, it was his job to kill them.
And as I drove home that night, I thought, what have I become that I could kill someone and not even care?
He was in the elevator on his way up to the 17th floor, and there was a 17-year-old young man in the elevator with him. Suddenly, this young man looked John right in the eye, and he said, "Jesus loves you."
And I said the first prayer I'd ever said. I said, up to now, all I've done is take from you, God. Now I want to give.
Within a year, by the grace of God, John was able to get out of the gang and be freed from this road to hell that he had been walking on. Go to Virgin Most Powerful YouTube channel and listen to this story today.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And here's an easy way to support us by going to smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center or Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And when you log in your Amazon account and you purchase products, a portion of it will go right back in supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And it doesn't cost you a dime. I want to thank you ahead of time because that supports us year-round. May God bless you and your family.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We are talking about the iron bed of naturalism with Ken Hensley. And Ken, right before the break, we're talking about reductionism, how some belief systems try to reduce everything to kind of like a simple core, and then stretch the evidence to either dismiss, counter evidence or what have you. And right before the break, you gave an incredibly interesting quote from Francis Crick. Maybe you could repeat it again for those maybe just coming on the show.
Sure. Francis Crick, a very, very famous atheist scientist. He writes, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are, in fact, no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules.
Yeah, boy. So there's not much of you, is there?
Well, the key word there, the key phrase is no more than. No more than.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
But, he's just taking a consistent materialist position.
Yep.
And if nothing exists but the material world, physical particles, whatnot, then obviously everything has to be reducible to material one way or another. That's why Darwin himself, that's what he had in mind when he referred to thoughts as excretions of brain, quote unquote, excretions of brain, which is something we've talked about. Now, yeah. I want to focus in on the issue of human consciousness a little bit more then, Gary, and begin by just dropping a few more juicy quotations on your listeners. These are all from atheist scientists and philosophers talking about consciousness and admitting that their materialist worldview cannot even begin to scratch the surface in accounting for consciousness or explaining consciousness. Here's one. And the thing that's interesting about it, though, is that they will all speak with full assurance that human beings are nothing but material. But then they will admit at the same time that they haven't got a clue as to how consciousness could possibly evolve from biological tissue. And here are some quotations from Jeffrey Medell in a book called Mind and Materialism. This is what he says: "The emergence of consciousness is a mystery and one to which materialism signally fails to provide an answer." And the thing that struck me about that quotation is he doesn't just say, we materialists have a hard time explaining consciousness, or we're really going to have to work hard to explain it. He says the emergence of consciousness is a mystery that materialism signally fails to provide an answer to. Okay, it fails. Here's another quotation from Jaegwon Kim in his book, Philosophy of Mind. Quote, "How can a series of physical events, little particles jostling against one another, electric current rushing to and fro, how can this blossom into a conscious experience?" And he admits he has no idea. One more from a book by Colin McGinn, another atheist. The book's called The Mysterious Flame. This is what he says: "How can mere matter originate consciousness? How did evolution convert the water of biological tissue into the wine of consciousness? Consciousness seems like a radical novelty in the universe. So how did it contrive to spring into being from what preceded it? It strikes us as miraculous, eerie, even faintly comic. Here's an atheist philosopher basically expressing utter dumbfoundedness at the idea that human consciousness could somehow arise from the jostling of atoms in biological tissue. He says consciousness seems like a radical novelty in the universe. It seems miraculous. So, it's easy to find quotation after quotation from atheists who basically are admitting that it doesn't fit. But see, because of their commitment to the worldview, though, it has to fit.
Right.
And so they will either suggest an idea, like maybe this is how to explain it, or they will simply say, we have no idea, but give us scientists more time. Give us more time. We're working up new things. We're learning new things every day. In time, we will have an answer.
Yeah.
Which reminds me a little bit of that movie that Ben Stein, that video that he made, that documentary called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. Anyway, yeah. At the end of that documentary, he did an interview with Richard Dawkins. And I guess he surprised Richard Dawkins. He called him up and he set up the interview, and Dawkins didn't know what it was about. And then in the interview, Ben Stein kind of pressed him up against the wall. He said, well, how do you explain the emergence of life? How do you explain it? And here you listen to Richard Dawkins begin to mumble. I mean, here he is, one of the top dogs in the world as far as expressing a neo-Darwinian, materialist, atheist worldview and all of that. He's written numerous books, The God Delusion being the most famous. And he sits there and he goes, well, it's possible that it was seeded here from outer space. Someone came here. He goes, but then life would have had to have evolved by natural means on that other planet before it came here. And then he says, or, it could have formed on crystals. He just starts throwing out things. He has no idea, just hasn't got a clue. But see, the commitment to the worldview, it's like Procrustes in his bed. When you know up front that nothing exists but material substances, then it doesn't really matter whether you have an answer, because you can just say, give me more time. This is a great subject to study. Wow, it's an exciting field of research. Give me more time. Okay, now,
yeah,
so here's one. Yeah, go ahead.
That reminds me of what I call naturalism in the gaps, which is kind of a flip side of God in the gaps. Is for a naturalist, if something can't be explained by their naturalism, well, then science will eventually someday, explain it. But you have to ask yourself, well, how do you know that?
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm really glad, because this is something that drives me insane. A lot of people hearing me make this argument, Catholics will say, oh, Ken, you're just making a God of the gaps argument. You're saying that because we can't explain scientifically how consciousness emerged, then we need to bring in what Dawkins refers to as the skyhook.
Right.
We need to bring God in. And this is what I like to say. Hey, there's an exact reverse of that. The naturalism of the gaps, or the natural selection of the gaps is the one that I like to use too. Yeah, because on the other side, from a materialist is doing exactly the same thing when he looks at something like consciousness and says, well, I can't explain it, but give me more time. Somehow random genetic mutation and natural selection brought this about, somehow, and just give us more time. So the bottom line is we have to look at the evidence in front of us. And all I'm saying here is this is what materialism has to deal with. I'm going to bring it up so people can think about it. This is what materialism has to deal with. Now, so anyway, thanks for bringing that in. Anyway, not all atheists, though, are willing to go this far. And the one I want to focus on here is a philosopher named Thomas Nagel. He's a very famous philosopher. He's professor for years and years at, I believe, New York University. But a well-known philosophical atheist who came out with a book in 2012. He came out with a book. Okay, now listen to this title, Gary, the most provocative title you've ever heard of a book. And he's an atheist. His book is titled Mind and Cosmos. Mind, the thing we're talking about, and Cosmos. Why the materialist, neo-Darwinian conception of nature is almost certainly false. That's his title.
Wow.
That's his title. Why the materialist, neo-Darwinian conception of nature is almost certainly false. And in this book, Professor Nagel, who is himself an atheist, and And he remains an atheist. In fact, he admits that he doesn't want to believe in a God. He says, I do not want to believe in God, because he doesn't want to believe that there's some accountability out there in the universe. And so he admits fully that he doesn't like the idea of God, and he doesn't want to believe in a God or anything like that. But on the other hand, he is burned out himself as a philosopher. He's burned out on naturalist philosophers and scientists, forcefully asserting continually that everything is material and that human consciousness can be explained as reducible to electrochemical processes in the brain, and assuring us that this is the case, insisting that this is the case without having any evidence. He's just burned out on it. And he basically just says, hey, look, let's face the fact that consciousness is this absolutely overwhelms our worldview as materialists. And I'm sick of hearing atheist philosophers, I'm sick of hearing atheist scientists just keep asserting that consciousness is reducible to matter. Give us more time, we'll figure out how. Assuring us every day that this is the case, and that to bring in God is to completely just throw philosophy in the trash or to throw science in the trash. It must be material. He says he's tired of it. And what he argues is that consciousness, especially the subjective experience, he says, of being conscious of ourselves as persons, he says this is such a fundamental characteristic of who we are as human beings, fundamental. And he says it stands out so conspicuously as distinct from material that he just says, I can no longer believe, I can no longer accept this mere assertion that it's explainable in material terms. And that's what he wrote the book about, was to say, I don't buy it anymore.
Wow. So does he give an alternative, or he just leaves it at that?
No, he does give an alternative, but let me press it a little bit more before we get to it. Here's a quotation from him, because I want you to hear his own words on this. This is what Thomas Nagel says. Consciousness is the most conspicuous obstacle to a comprehensive naturalism that relies only on the resources of physical science. The existence of consciousness seems to imply that the physical description of the universe, in spite of its richness and explanatory power, is only part of the truth. If we take this problem seriously and follow out its implications, it threatens to unravel the entire naturalistic world picture. Okay? So his argument, again, basically is he's saying, look, I'm a philosopher, I'm a smart guy, I'm a world-famous philosopher, I've written a number of books, and I'm an atheist. And I'm saying to the rest of you, I can't take it any longer. You guys just keep on insisting that everything is reducible to material, asserting it, demanding it, requiring us all to believe it. And he says, basically, consciousness, this is the one he focuses on, mind. That's why the book's called Mind and Cosmos. Consciousness, he says, is so conspicuously an obstacle. Oh, okay, we'll have to come back for your answer, all right?
Yeah, that's a good cliffhanger. We'll talk with Ken Hensley about naturalism. Stay tuned.
This is Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio. This March, VMPR, in association with the Catholic Resource Center, will be hosting a special conference for the Adoramus Society. Adoramus at the Triduum, a conference on the spirituality of the Triduum liturgies, featuring speakers Father Joseph Fessio, Dr. Anthony Lillis, and Christopher Carstens, addressing such topics as developing a liturgical spirituality, the spirituality of Holy Thursday, the spirituality of Good Friday, and the spirituality of the Paschal Vigil and Easter season. It all takes place March 14, 2020, at the historic Sacred Heart Chapel at 381 West Center Street, Covina, California, 91723. You can register online at vmpr.org or call now at 877-526-2151 to reserve your seat today for Adoramus at the Triduum. Jesus said to the apostles in Luke chapter 10, "Whoever listens to you listens to me, and whoever rejects you rejects me." According to St. Boniface, in her voyage across the ocean of this world, the Church is like a great ship being pounded by the waves of life's different stresses, our duty is not to abandon ship, but to keep her on course. May our Lord help us remain ever faithful to His church, to aid and defend her.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics, and we are chatting with Ken Hensley about the iron bed of naturalism. And Ken, right before the break, you were quoting from a very preeminent atheistic philosopher, Nagel, who basically, you said, he's kind of fed up with all this, we can eventually explain consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good summary.
Yeah. He, it's the reductionist thing. This is what, just quickly, this is why worldviews are so powerful, and worldviews are often controlling, much more than evidence, much more than facts. Worldviews control. I've often given the illustration when talking to people that if Jesus were to, let's say Richard Dawkins and I are in a room together, and Jesus rises from the dead right in front of us, right between us, and we both know that he's been dead for 3 days, a corpse, and he comes to life right in front of us. Since I have a supernaturalist worldview, a theistic worldview, I would respond by saying, see, miracles do happen. Jesus was who he claimed to be. But Dawkins could consistently respond by saying, wow, strange things happen in a natural universe. We didn't know about corpses coming back to life after 3 days. Give us scientists more time, and we'll explain how this happened in a purely natural way.
Right.
He doesn't have to believe in the supernatural. He can stick by his guns, as it were, by his materialist guns. But anyway, Thomas Nagel is tired of it, though. Thomas Nagel is burned out on this continual insistence. In fact, he says, one more little quote from him before I tell you what his answer to the problem is. He also says this in the book. He says, I realize that such doubts, that is the doubts that he's having about the sufficiency of materialism, I realize that such doubts will strike many people as outrageous. But that is because almost everyone in our secular culture has been browbeaten into regarding the reductive research program as sacrosanct, on the ground that anything else would not be science. Okay, that quotation it's dense, but it's full of stuff. He says, my doubts will strike many people as outrageous. He means people in the atheistic scientific community. But that is because almost everyone in our secular culture has been browbeaten, he's saying, browbeaten into regarding the reductionist research program of science as sacrosanct, on the ground that anything else would not be science. He's basically saying that in our secular culture now, all of us have been browbeaten into, stating that the universe is just material and that science is the source of truth and the only source of truth, and we need to wait on the scientists and to bring anything else into the explanatory picture, to even mention the word God or spirit or human soul or anything non-material. Well, that's to be rejected out of hand because it's not science. Okay, anyway, here's his answer. Thomas Nagel is working on an idea. At least at the time he wrote the book, he was working on an idea. And here's the idea. His solution is that simply that both matter and mind exist side by side in the universe and have always, but with no God.
Okay.
Okay. There's no personal God behind it all, no creator. It's just that instead of having material always existing, we have material and we have mind. Just two separate things, always existing. And therefore, in our bodies, we have material and we have mind. They've come together. But there's no one behind it, no one putting it together, because, again, he doesn't like the idea of God and he doesn't want to. I mean, although anybody hearing this would immediately think, well, there's got to be something that puts it together. There's got to be something that made it. There's got to be something. Right. So he's sort of stepping halfway, isn't he? He's just saying, okay, I will accept material, and I'm going to accept now that there is another substance in the universe that we call mind. And that's as far back as I can go.
Yeah.
They must have always existed.
Huh. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he has no argument for it. He's just casting about because he's thinking, look, we can't explain mind in terms of matter. We just can't. And therefore, why not just bite the bullet and say that two things exist? There's a kind of a dualism, that there's material and there's mind.
Wow.
Now,
yeah. Go ahead.
And again, he's saying that that this worldview, this reductionist worldview of scientism, I guess we could call it, has been foisted on us, and we've been browbeaten, in a sense, into accepting it as being the only intellectual position that can be held. Anything else, and you're just a goofy guy from the Middle Ages, believing in witches and goblins and all that kind of thing. And so now this is something that, to me, see, we're talking about the iron bed of naturalism. This is something that I feel is important. I think that, okay, science has not demonstrated that materialism is true. Okay, science cannot demonstrate that materialism is true.
Right.
That's a philosophical question.
Yeah.
It's not something that even in principle science could demonstrate. I mean, science, the methods of science and the tools of science, they are all about the study of the material world. Questions like, where does it come from? Is there anything else? Is not a question that science can answer. I like to say, scientists do not see angels in test tubes, and they've never found God under a rock or behind a tree. They can't say anything about God. They can't say anything about it. But something has happened in our world over the last couple of hundred years, and I think it's because of the successes of science. Because science has been so successful in some obvious ways, medical science, engineering, progress in technology, being able to fly to the moon and all these kinds of things, that people kind of forget that science cannot demonstrate that materialism is true. And so atheists holding to a material worldview have kind of slipped the material worldview in on the coattails of science.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a sleight of hand trick, that I show you. Look how smart science is. We can make a rocket. We can send it to Mars. Therefore, materialism is true, even though they're two completely different questions. You follow what I'm saying? I'm not saying.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And you can see how that would work, too, because, all the bells and whistles are going off with scientific discoveries. It's easy to kind of forget, there's other things that are beyond the pale of science that do exist, like mind.
Right. Like mind, like love, like so many other things.
Yeah.
So anyway, all I'm trying to do here, again, from another angle, is to show that the reductionist program of thinking you can reduce everything down to material, your listeners should at least go away realizing that there are countless scientists who are willing to admit that they haven't got a clue, that they're completely dumbfounded and lost as to trying to understand how consciousness would arise from material, and that at least one, Thomas Nagel, and I'm sure there are more, but I don't have a encyclopedic knowledge of everything that's being written. Thomas Nagel has thrown up his hands and has said, I just reject it. And he's gone the position of saying there must be material and there must be mind existing all the time. I don't know how it started. Don't ask me that. I don't believe in God. I don't even want there to be a God. But I can't buy any longer this idea that everything is reducible to material. And the thing that I think is in a way darkly humorous about the position that atheism is in now is that if you compare it to Procrustes and his little bed, his iron bed, Procrustes, at least the worst that he did was to cut off people's feet and ankles to make them fit. Whereas naturalism has gone so far now is to cut off our heads to make us fit. Because they have to just eliminate the brain, or not the brain, but the mind. Yeah. Eliminate rationality, eliminate human consciousness, eliminate free will, eliminate memory, eliminate ambition, intention, desire, all these things that just have to be eliminated and called illusion.
Yeah. So, that's a great point. So it's actually it's even worse than iron bed. This whole idea of reductionism, it's so attractive because I think people desire simple answers to complex questions, And I know with my work, and I'm sure with your work too, with counter-cult ministry, the thing that makes cults attractive is that they reduce mysteries of faith to simple, things like, is Jesus true God, true man? Well, he's just a man, right? How is God? God? Well, God is an exalted human being that lives on a planet by a star named Kolob. It's easy to imagine. What is heaven? Heaven is Jannah. That you have the best food, and it reduces difficult things to very simplistic answers.
Yeah, the star Kolob might not be the simple part, but you know what, Gary? This raises other subjects, but I've thought the same thing that you're saying about when you think of it, the great heresies of history all seem to be attempts to kind of rationally resolve in a simple way something that is complex and mysterious. All the heresies regarding to the Trinity were to either say on the one side, hey, there's just one God who's appearing in different modes, or on the other side to say, hey, let's just realize there's three gods and simplify. And the church's position was, no, it's a mystery. And the same thing with Christ. It was either to say he's just a man upon whom the Spirit comes in a unique way, or on the other side to say he's just God looking like a man, appearing to be a man. All the heresies are kind of like that, aren't they?
Yeah. And, even with astronomy, that the planets revolved in perfect circles because that's easy and it looks nice,
Yeah, and then you find out they kind of don't.
Yeah, right.
And I've thought that about the created world too. When you look out at trees, I really love trees. But I noticed that every single tree on earth is shaped different. Yeah. And you would kind of think that if you were like a God who was like thinking in terms of simplicity, that you would have like maybe some varieties of trees, but they would all be the same. All the willows would look the same. All the aspen trees would look the same. But God doesn't do that,
Right. Well, hey, great program as always, man. It just flew. Ken, where can people get a hold of your stuff?
Well, if they want recorded materials, go to kennethhensley.com. But I would encourage them to come to the Coming Home Network, chnetwork.org. That's the ministry that we have was begun by Marcus Grodi some 25 years ago, that we help people who are looking at the Catholic faith. Our tagline, if I can remember it, is something like, the Coming Home Network, helping you to see the truth and beauty of the Catholic Church and make your way home.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks,
Ken
Gary.
Hensley, ladies and gentlemen, and the fun continues with the Terry and Jesse Show, High Impact Catholic Talk coming at you next. And tomorrow we're going to have William Hemsworth of the Tucson Apologetics Institute talk about Catholic quotes in the early church fathers. Thank you so much for tuning into the program, and I hope that everybody has a great day. Bye-bye, everybody.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.